Welcome to all of you to our Ukraine at War Monitor. And today it's a great pleasure for me to welcome Igor Yegorov. Igor has been with us now for almost exactly 2 months. In his real life, he's a professor of economics at the Taras Shevchenko National University of Kiev. He is department head and was deputy director of the Institute of Economics and Forecasting of the National Academy of Sciences of Ukraine. Igor has worked a lot in the field of economics, science and innovation. And he's also, among other things, been pretty busy nationally and internationally in the evaluation of research institutions. Igor, welcome. Thanks a lot for being my partner in this conversation today. And just by way of opening, I was interested how you judge the outcome of the Lugano conference. Will the Ukraine be able to comply with all the conditions that the West has formulated there? I think they laid down sort of 7 conditions. Above all, of course, get a grip on corruption and things like that. Yeah. So what's your spontaneous say on that?
Okay, thank you for this session. Yes, you see, here, yeah, Lugano conference, ended, approximately one week ago, and frankly speaking, I had plans to reach my good old fellow who participated in this conference from Ukrainian side. He's a diplomat, but it's very difficult to reach him. He's too busy with other things. He became deputy minister in one of the Ukrainian ministries. So I will use only open sources, for comments and for my evaluation. This conference is very important for Ukraine because we had already a number of different meetings, international meetings related to the war against Ukraine and to Russian invasion and to damages of this Russian invasion to Ukrainian economy. But this conference is very important because it tried to provide, a comprehensive assessment of the situation and a comprehensive vision of the future of recovery of Ukraine. Actually, we had, a lot of representatives from all our partners from the West in this conference, and they presented quite interesting report. By the way, it was prepared by dozens and dozens of experts, from different fields. So I was, frankly speaking, I was really impressed, from this report. It's more than 100 pages and very concentrated text and how to say, very interesting text with a lot of data, with a lot of information and with a lot of assessments. They provided, vision and, some draft elements of plan for recovery. I think that it's very important that they mentioned, establishment of the responsible body for coordination of this recovery process and the improvement of capacity of public administration and local governments. This is really very important for Ukraine because we still have, despite all reforms of the recent years, we still have, a lot of gaps in coordination in our government, and it's really very difficult, how to say, to find the common language with a lot of them, and not only within the country. In May, I visited the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe, and they also told us that they couldn't find, person who was responsible for some aspects of development of Ukraine, because they have a lot of changes almost every month or every quarter, so even at the personal level, but also they have changes of functions in different ministries between different agencies. So this could be stopped, and I think it's very important to have, this kind of body as for me, it's my opinion, with under strict international control. It's very, again, because without it, level of corruption is still very high in the country, very high. At the level of ministries, at the level of different agencies, and at the level of state enterprises especially. So without strict control, it would not be possible to use this assistance, international assistance, effectively.
Maybe before you go on, if you want to address also issues that you find in this report that was the basis for the Lugano conference, I could already address my second question here, which is really how in general does one estimate the degree of destruction of an economy in a war or due to a war, and what exactly are you looking at then in the Ukraine, the entire Ukraine or Ukraine minus Donbas region? So what is it that has been done in this report, for example?
Okay, let me start with a couple of remarks. A couple of remarks. It's really very extremely complex problem, but and also I have to say that it's also related to our statistics. We will have, some quite experts saying that we will have, more or less comprehensive figures only in September this year because of these statistical cycles, that we have in the country. So now it's very difficult. However, we have, some figures. The economy has lost approximately 30–50% of production capacity, mainly in eastern Ukraine. Human losses are, exceptional. Lugano conference mentioned something like 10,000, approximately 10,000 civilians, but we have different figures, from different sources, and I think that figures are much higher, especially bearing in mind that we have no exact information from the eastern parts of the country, especially from Mariupol. Some experts think that between 15 and 25,000 people died in Mariupol only. So human losses are great. A lot of people lost their jobs, of course, because of because of this economic crisis, and because some enterprises under Russian control now. A lot of Zen factories and plants, many plants were destroyed. I will show you, some data. Only 1% of companies are not affected by war. It was, the result of survey. 1%, you can imagine, in the country. So then some material losses. You can see those figures. They are very impressive. More than 122,000 residential buildings were destroyed, and only 100,000 private houses and other, apartment buildings. But anyway, this is a lot of apartments destroyed, for a lot of people. Up to 2,000 educational institutions, 15 airports, about power plant stations, the main or the key, nuclear station is under control of Russians now. The Zaporizhia, station with 6 reactors. So this is the largest nuclear station in Ukraine. And you can see also figures about roads, railway tracks, bridges, and bridge crossings. So damages are huge for the country, And I have
can I just ask, is this really sort of spread out in the country? So, we know that most heavily, of course, Mariupol, the south, and the east, the Donbas region are heavily affected. What about other parts of the
I have an example. I will show you example, in the next slide, 2 cities, example of Mariupol and example of Chernihiv. Usually, our media told about, complete destruction of Chernihiv, but I have, very good friends in Chernihiv. He was born in Chernihiv, visited this city after the war. Approximately 15% of all buildings are destroyed or damaged but this is not, the key point for Russian aggression, Chernihiv. You have to understand. In Kiev, I will also show you, data for Kiev on the next slide. But in Mariupol, you can see 78% of buildings damaged or destroyed. 78%. And this is not even our figures. The figures from Russia. I found them yesterday. So in Russian media. And now they say that, if buildings were shelled, the price of restoration will be approximately 50–60% of the price of building new, building new. So they will not be restored. Russian propaganda at least says this. So we see that a lot of destruction, and Chernihiv is in the central and the northern Ukraine, and it's interesting, figures about the capital, about Kiev, 200 buildings were damaged as a result, this is. But around Kiev, they have a lot of destructions, in suburbs especially, in Bucha, in Irpin, some other places, and I know even in our, in our district where I have, dacha, small dacha, I know that a lot of buildings were destroyed, in Borispil, region. So around Kiev, 20,000 were damaged, buildings were damaged approximately. So you can see that, we have destruction in many regions of the country, So situation is, of course, in Donbass, the situation is worse, definitely worse. But in other regions, we also have a lot of problems. Probably situation is slightly better, say, in Kherson, which was captured by Russians very quickly, or in some other cities, But if you have the places of fighting, situation is really very dangerous, for ordinary people. And
we also heard a lot of reports that Russian missiles hit critical infrastructure, military infrastructure, but also civil infrastructure, energy plants, for instance, so things that might really put at risk energy supply, water supply, possibly food supply to the normal population. Can you tell us more about this? And do you think this is part of a strategy of the Russians to actually harm the Ukrainian people beyond just the military?
It's a difficult question, frankly speaking. Of course, Russians destroyed also very important elements of infrastructure. For instance, in Mariupol, they've destroyed all stations which supplied water, more than 20 stations, all stations are destroyed, They destroyed a lot of electrical stations which supply electricity for trains, especially to prevent, supplies of military supplies. A lot of tanks, a lot of airports and other very important elements of infrastructure. But as for me, at the same time, they're trying, first of all, to reach military targets. But again, I will show you a picture, which is related to my own experience, You can see, this picture, why it's interesting. On the other side, you can see, these buildings. These buildings are buildings of the Artyom military plant. And you can see civilian cars here, and here just behind the trees, you cannot see my house, They targeted, they actually attacked this military plant 3 times, and they destroyed, completely all windows in my apartment, completely, not only glasses, but only windows completely, and how to say, other elements of the apartment, 3 times. Can you imagine, you know? And also you cannot see here, but you can find it easily in the internet, you know, two other houses which are close, you know, to this building, this one and another one. Actually, as I understand, you know, these missiles were intercepted by Ukrainian forces, but parts of these missiles, you know, targeted, you know, actually these two buildings. And first time they killed one journalist from the Voice of America, and the second time they killed, you know, civilians, you know, in the highest floors of the next building. Actually, they're very close to this building. We have stairs here, you know.
So what you're saying is that often there are military structures targeted, but then kind of there is
first of all
collateral damage, you know, so that civil buildings are also...
civil buildings. So this is very important. I'm not sure that they want, how to say, to target, you know, ordinary people, probably too, but I'm not sure, you know, the key idea to reduce Ukrainian military potential, you know, and industrial potential. But it's not possible to do it, you know, without damages for civilian population, you know. And this is example. You can see, you know, they have fire. You cannot see, you know, from my balcony, you can see, you know, the building in this on this enterprise and this factory, you know, destroyed by half. You know, by the direct, you know, directly by a Russian missile, you know. These buildings were not destroyed. Other buildings were not destroyed to such extent, but you cannot find, you know, any remaining, you know, windows in neighboring buildings. You can see these buildings, you know, buildings around. So
the background for my question was, of course, that I said, on the one hand, we know there are certain military targets that we can read about that the Russians have, but then you also read, of course, proclamations that there are even, you know, ideas of a kind of not just de-Nazification, but also de-Ukrainization, you know, so re-education programs, etc.
yeah.
But I take it from your answer, you don't really believe in a kind of military strategy, but rather in this kind of collateral damage idea. Okay, I don't want to force you.
I think the first idea of Russian commanders, you know, is destruction of military targets, destruction of system of how to say authority. I mean, power. You know, this system of power, system of institutions in Ukraine. You know, they targeted, you know, some administrative buildings and so on, and buildings of other buildings are secondary targets. Again, it's my impression. Probably it will be also in contrast with your vision. But even when Russians targeted, you know, schools or some other buildings, you know, I mean, kindergarten and so on, you know, you have to understand that during the war, you know, Ukrainian military uses these buildings. They are empty. They are not used by school children. They are not used by. They have to use them because, you know, for barracks, for storages, for something else, you know. So and Russians know about this, and of course they are trying to destroy these things, but as a military targets first of all. No, this is a great contradiction. Of course, I blame Russians for this, but I also have to understand, you know, Ukrainian military. They need some places, you know, for use for their purposes, you know.
Yeah, this also gives us, of course, a more balanced view if we just see the number of destroyed schools or kindergartens or school buildings, etc., that they may not have been destroyed as schools or so for such. I mean, we said we want to look at estimating the destruction, but we will also want to learn more about plans for the future Ukraine, and this is also why we set out with the results of the Lugano conference. And I would now like to raise a few questions concerning the future of the Ukraine. One thing I was interested in is the following. I mean, we can assume that once this rebuilding will start, and when that could be, we can speculate on later. most or all of it will be rather according to Western standards. I mean, it will be the one opportunity to rebuild Ukraine and to use Western technology, Western infrastructure, using Western standards, doing away with Soviet standards that partly go back, well, for half a century or go to Tsarist times, if you think of the track system, for example. So am I right in assuming this, or you think there are also parts of Ukraine infrastructure that might really be rebuilt?
You're right in principle. Actually, even before the war, we had plans to introduce some criteria, some green criteria for utilization of different technologies for our ministries. So we have this system of evaluation of new projects, and we wanted, to include, the things. So I think this process will continue, and we will use, some this green, criteria, for rebuilding of the country. And
I think climate friendliness was also one of the big things that the Lugano conference is demanding.
You're right. And actually, we had already before the special green tariffs for our electricity. Of course, it was not easy to keep it because it's quite high for consumers. But I think it would be possible at least to find some solution to continue, with introduction of new energy standards. And by the way, it was one of the preconditions for signing this agreement in 2014, that Ukraine will switch to international standards of contamination and, some other things. So, of course, but at the same time, a level of of use of energy per unit of GDP in Ukraine is higher than in other countries, higher than even than in Russia, so it would not be easy to do this quickly. So probably we will need more time, to switch to Western standards, but with Western technologies, of course, I think it would be possible. We had a quite interesting project funded partly by Volkswagen Stiftung, and we studied, some green technologies, introduction of green technologies in energy sector in Ukraine. So we have very few patents. So we studied, of course, available information, some patents, in this field, but these patents are very useful for adjustment of Western technologies for Ukrainian energy sector. So I hope it will continue the same with other sectors. With other sectors, probably with roads. This is, you mentioned, the width of this road was established by Tsar, many at the end of the 19th century, So, and of course, Ukraine now thinks about changes, and switching to European standards in these roads and also in other types of roads. And
I mean, none of us is somehow, I guess, none of us is experienced in how to cope with even the scope of this problem of rebuilding large parts of the country. But if you do this, if you plan this like in Lugano, and if you have specialists in different countries, are there prioritizations? I mean, do you say civil buildings first or schools first and economy second, or is it all at the same? So is there any way of steering this, or is this just happily happening side by side and whatever is?
I think thank you for your question. I think it's not easy to answer on it because of course we have to rebuild different sectors simultaneously, but at the same time we have first goals, first objectives. As I understand, first we have to provide shelter for people who lost their homes, you know. This is very important before winter, you know. This is for me. Then probably, again, this is my vision. Probably we will need to rebuild infrastructure, you know, at least, you know, water supplies, you know, supplies of electricity. At the same time, some basic services. Roads could wait a little, as for me, you know. Schools, yes, of course, it's also very important, but now we have a distant learning system, you know, people during COVID period, you know, people started to study on distance. So this, of course, is also very important, but
hospitals, for example.
Hospitals, yes, but again, hospitals also could be, it would be possible to find the places for hospitals even in some, you know, hotels, and, you know, some, at least, you know, it would be possible to provide, you know, some minimal services. But if people have no place for living, you know, it's terrible. It's terrible, simply, especially in the winter, you know. This, so we have to provide them, you know, with this some kind of basic things. So.
Do you think there will also be thoughts of how to balance rebuilding civil infrastructure and buildings and apartments for the civilian population on the one hand, but then there is also the necessity for rebuilding military infrastructure. Yeah. So how to balance the civil and the military, would you think, in this rebuilding process?
I think at this moment it would be. Again, probably I'm not right, but I think it would be possible to receive at least some armaments, some weapons from partners, you know, because to start to produce it just very quickly in Ukraine would be difficult. Of course, it would be also possible, but we have, you know, to try to balance, you know, the targets. But you know, protect people is more important. At the same time, of course, it's also possible to use different kind of empty buildings for them, you know, temporarily at least, you know. So that's why we need plans for every region, you know, and as Lugano proposes, you know, and every region actually now has its own sponsors, you know, from the West. So some Western countries are ready, you know, to help different regions. And I've seen, you know, interview with Mayor of Kharkiv. He explained, you know, how they attract Italian and British architectures, you know, to rebuild the city. So I hope other regions also have, you know, their, how to say, partners, sponsors. I hope this will also help. But of course, you're right. We need, you know, also military, you know. In fact, but again, in military sphere also, we have to find balance. For instance, Ukraine, in the Soviet times, Ukraine was famous for building of Russian fleet, you know, military vessels, you know. But now probably we can wait with this, you know. Probably we have to return, you know, to how to say, to producing of anti-missiles, missiles, you know, anti-aircraft equipment and other things. So it's also possible, you know, to focus on some areas which are more important at the moment than others.
I would like to briefly come back to the energy question and all the ingredients of my questions we've mentioned already. You mentioned Zaporizhia as the largest nuclear power plant in Ukraine, I think even sort of Europe. So do you think Ukraine will continue with its strong reliance on nuclear energy, or would it rather be these alternative wind or solar energy that will be made much stronger in the future?
I think that in the future, you're right. Of course, we will use more effectively, you know, other sources of energy. But at the moment, you know, nuclear energy comprises approximately 50% of production of energy in Ukraine. You know, we cannot stop, you know, this kind of energy supplies, you know, at the moment. This is the first thing. And second, I told that we have no control over, you know, half of our nuclear potential at the moment, you know, so they're under under Russians, in Zaporizhia region. So probably in the future we will rely to some extent, at least to some extent, on nuclear energy, but with probably acceleration of utilization of other types of energy. But again, at the same time, we used, initially we used, Crimea or southern parts of Ukraine, for solar energy, but now it's more difficult because of this, again, Russian occupation. You cannot use this territory to the same scale as it was, before. At least at this moment, I hope that it will be possible to do this in the future, once this territories will be liberated. But again, it's very difficult to predict. And also main production sites for how to say, non-nuclear energy, but for energy based on fuel, are also under Russian control now, or almost under Russian control. Ugledar and is under siege, and then another Starobelska station is also already under Russian control. So.
Yeah, I see you really have very, very interesting figures there also. So, I mean, there doesn't seem to be a problem at the moment for Ukraine in terms of gas supply.
I think, it's again, it's a paradox of modern war, Europe still receives gas from Russia through Ukrainian territory. Not at the same volume, but anyway, despite we have, war with Russia, And of course, Ukraine has, how to say, places for storage of gas. Famous places in Transcarpathia region. They are quite large. So we still have.
Also would have been nice. Would have loved to hear that. He knows that region very well.
No, but you see. So we still have some reserves, but. I'm not sure it would be enough for going through winter. Through winter, we will see. This. Of course, the consumption will be reduced. It's natural, what to say, step, but we will see. We will see anyway.
Well, I have two more questions. I'm afraid they are not simpler than any of the previous questions. Before then, the audience can come in with their comments and questions. The one is, and that also goes back to one of the, or may relate to one of your slides that I've seen with many billions estimations of damage done. So how is it really possible to roughly even estimate the costs it takes to rebuild Ukraine? So we see all these massive figures there.
Figures are different because again, if sometimes it's more or less easy. When you look at the balance of costs, balance price of the building, if it's destroyed, you can say, oh, the price of this building was, say, $2 million. But of course, it's very difficult to find estimates of indirect costs. You cannot estimate them correctly. That's why we have such different figures. Such different figures for different organizations, and KSE, Kiev School of Economics, actually. They calculate only direct figures, price of, say, a bridge or something like this. Of course, this is not relevant for the country, but we will see. We will see, of course. Probably not all the subjects will be rebuilt. Not all of them. For instance, Azovstal, I'm not sure that this plant has to be rebuilt or could be rebuilt. It was not, from ecological point of view, it was not in place, and so on and so on. So probably not. But some other places, of course, they have to be rebuilt, and we have to, and probably they have to be rebuilt on the new, new basis. We had already passed several new rules related to industrial parks. because previous laws were not good. I remember they assumed that we have only to build, some, how to say this, greenfield industrial parks. And only such parks could receive, some stimuli, some incentives from the state. But now this law has been changed, and now we can use, already existing infrastructure, for the enterprises for creation of new industrial parks and so on. So anyway, it's not an easy question. By the way, I have to say that you see some recommendations which we have, in this program are not relevant as for me. For instance, they recommended to focus on STEM education and entrepreneurship. What I have to say, in Ukraine, it's very, we really have problems with this. Ukraine produces mainly, how to say, primary products, not sophisticated products, and those people couldn't find the jobs, in Ukraine. I was surprised, for instance, in radio electronics, all these people, in our universities had state stipends, In economics, people have to pay for their education, or in legal sciences, they have to pay. And here, but they couldn't find job after, after graduation. So first we have probably to create, some new companies, or stimulate creation of new companies. Of course, this is not state as and then those people have to find job in the future. They can see perspective. Okay.
Well, maybe you want to have the conclusions at the end, right? So I mean,
Yeah, okay.
it looks like it, but perhaps make more sense. The other question that I have, the last one before the floor is all yours in the audience, is what do you think, when will the rebuilding, when can it start? I mean, is it that in certain parts you will start now already, or is it that you wait for negotiations to come and a somewhat halfway stable armistice, or what do you think? What does the international community say about it?
I think that in some parts, Ukraine has started, this rebuilding, especially in around Kiev, and in some other parts, we have already started this process, But in some parts of, especially in Donbass, of course, it's not possible, So we have to wait till the end of the war, and the end of this, how to say, and Russian withdrew, their troops. I hope so. That it would be, time for rebuilding of those territories, but not now. In Kharkiv also they've started, to rebuild, at least some parts of the city, So.
Well, it's starting already then.
Yeah,
floor is over to you. I'm